Good evening and hello, everyone. How are you all doing?
Good evening, doing well this evening. I
Good.
hope you had a nice trip.
I did. I did. I'm recovering from it. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I didn't
Excellent.
I learned a lot about Portugal. I didn't really know that much about it before we left, but I learned a number of things about it. It was a great place. I would highly recommend it.
Excellent.
So
Hopefully you have wonderful pictures.
I do, but I have a wife who's very shy about having her picture posted anywhere, which is strange because she's a beautiful woman, but she doesn't like having her pictures posted. It's okay if her friends post them, but if I post them, I get in trouble. I'm still trying to figure that one out, but that's okay. That's okay. That's one of those things. Well, tonight I'm excited to be back to our live class. Thank you for participating in the asynchronous version of the class over the 4th of July and the week that I was away. So I appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions about the course or assignments? I know I owe some feedback to somebody sent me a draft of their final paper and I'm blanking on who did that. So I will get back to you on that. I think it might have been Rebecca Griffin, but I'm not, my memory's faulty here. So I have it in my email to respond to. So questions on the course assignments or any other aspects of the course? None at this
I
time.
had a quick question. This is Rebecca
Okay.
Guerra. I was curious to know, I know that over the course of these few weeks that we've been together, a few people have been speaking about articulate storyline. Is
Right.
that a is that something that we as students have access to through the ISD program, or is that just something that people have access to it through their work?
Right. We don't, it can be an expensive software program. The full price is like $1,400, $1,500 that is not available through you by UMBC. Although what Storyline does is occasionally, usually about once a year, they'll contact me and they'll say, we're running a special. If you're a UMBC student or UMBC alumni or UMBC faculty or have a UMBC email address, they sell it for $299, which is the best
Oh.
price you'll ever get
Hmm.
that I've seen. So what I normally do is send that out to our current student and our alumni list, and I think
Okay.
a fair amount of people take advantage of it. It's a good program. I'm an occasional user of it. I'm certainly not a power user, nor I am an expert, but I just like the program. I'm not a big fan of having to learn a zillion different software programs. It gets
Right.
down to like a function of time.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, very good. Anyone else have any questions or comments or concerns before we get to the good part of the evening, which is talking to Catherine? All right, I am not hearing anything, so I'll proceed. Hopefully, you can see Catherine's picture and her bio up on your screen. Catherine has done a number of things in her career, from starting her own business, which is very successful. She's doing very well. A couple I like a lot of things about Catherine, but some of the things I like the most is that number one, she's a graduate of our program, and I always kid her that when I spoke with her before she um, applied to the program and she was checking programs out, and she was checking out like dozens of different programs from all across the country. I always told her half jokingly, but it's really true, that you ask the most questions of any prospective student I have ever come across in 15 years, and I think she got a kick out of that. Um, but we're very proud to have her as a graduate of our program. She actually is a winner of the UMBC Dr. Marvin Cook Award for Outstanding Academic Excellence, Service, and Entrepreneurship. Um, she also is the past president of ISPI Potomac branch. And when Catherine started that position, that that chapter was in kind of disarray. They were on the downslide, and Catherine turned the chapter around, really got it energized, and put a lot of efforts into recruiting new members, and recruited a phenomenal number of new members, and got things going. And subsequently, since then, the chapter has won a number of excellent chapter awards from the national ISPI. So, I could go on and on about things that I like about Catherine, and achievements that she has made in her career. One of the things I really truly appreciate about Catherine is that she is a huge person in terms of giving back to UMBC in our program. I don't ever remember her saying, no, I can't do that, or I don't have the time. She always is very generous with her time, and I'm truly appreciative of that. So I could go on a lot longer, but I won't, because it's probably better that you hear her speak than me speak. So Catherine, I'm going to hand over the presenting wand to you, and you'll get some sort of indication that you're trying to give this presenting wand to me, and you'll have to click yes, and then you'll have to click on show my screen so they can see your screen. And I can see your screen. Very good.
All right. Greg, thank you so much. So this is sort of a mutual admiration society. I was just telling a teaming partner this afternoon, I shared with him that I am a graduate of the UMBC program and that I have the honor to be able to teach in the program. And I said to him that it is the longest relationship I've had with any institution. So I started my studies in the UMBC program in 2006 and have been connected to it. And Greg has been a big part of it. So even though he says to me that I have been very generous with my time, Greg is also very generous with his time. So it makes it very easy to say yes. Our program is very special and unique. And I tell people this often when I meet them out. So when Greg, he was being a little modest when he said that I was looking at a dozen programs. I think I told him when I reached out to him, and I am not joking, I had looked at 54 master's programs before I decided on our program. And I knew very clearly, or I didn't know very clearly when I started looking at master's programs, and I was looking at MBA programs, and I would go on tours, and I was unimpressed with the application aspect of the MBA programs. And one program specifically, they had said, I said, do you do a joint MBA program with the UMBC ISD program? And they said, no, you'll have to enroll there and then enroll here. And I said, well, that doesn't sound very entrepreneurial to me. And you've just told me I should go somewhere else. So when I was sitting in one of the information sessions, listening to a professor do a presentation, I was so bored, and this is why I didn't apply for any of them. And I thought to myself, I want to be redesigning this. So I started to really get the bug, the ISD bug. So when I talked to Greg and he shared with me, I did ask lots of questions, the same questions that I had asked all of these other programs. He was the first that really practiced the adult learning principles that we teach in this program. So he could tell that I was nervous about returning back to school. Having been out of school for a decade, I was apprehensive, and he walked me through saying, how would you feel if you took just one class at a time and worked towards a certificate and got a credential? And then if you like that, you continue on in the master's program. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. So the elegance and the design of our program really embodies the principles that we talk about in terms of good design. And it's very easy for me to be generous with the program because I benefited so much from the program and from working with Greg. So Greg, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the class tonight and share some of my experiences. I'd actually like to start off, this is what I shared with Greg, I'd love to start off by answering your questions before I get into the presentation, and trying to fully explore your questions is as important, if not more important, than the presentation that I've prepared for you on learner readiness. So the only other thing that I want to add before I start answering the questions, I met a fellow UMBC graduate student in my last semester. I had taken a gaming class. His name is Jim Rich, and Jim went on to serve on my board when I was ISPI president. And Jim had started the research for this presentation when he was a student in the program, like you are. And then he invited me, after we both graduated and we both served on the board, to begin to put this research that he had developed into practice. And we began to present this presentation that I'm doing with you tonight with local ATD chapters. And this coming fall, I'll be doing a similar presentation with another graduate of the program, a certificate program, and a fellow colleague in Sweden. We've been invited to present this presentation to an audience at the ISPI EMEA conference, which is the European and African audiences of the ISPI. So I just want to dedicate tonight's session to Jim. I do this all the time. Jim passed unexpectedly 2 years ago, and I am grateful that he was one of my learning partners in the program, and that I'm able to live his legacy, continue to live his legacy with other students that haven't met him. So just to begin, I'd like to start off by answering some of your questions, and we might make this a little two-way. Feel free as I'm responding. Since we've got a small, intimate group, if you want to ask a follow-up question to your question, I invite you to do that. If you want to type it into chat, I invite you to do that as well. But I want this to be as interactive as possible. I want it to be as meaningful as possible, and I hope you get as much out of the responses to your questions as you get in the presentation around learner readiness. So let's get started here. I see a few questions from Rhonda. And I'll read it out, and then I'll start to answer. And Rhonda, if you have questions, follow-up questions, feel free to ask. So the question that Rhonda asked is, when implementing any change or improvement in a process, there is typically some resistance to change. Do you have any examples of suggesting or recommending a change and did not have a favorable reception to the plan? So Rhonda, change is a big topic that I actually have been brought in to help with specifically. In the class that I teach the Connecting Instructional Systems Design and Human Performance Improvement in the fall. I introduce a change model that has been very popular, my experience, at least in with my federal work. So we know that people resist change, and we know that there are different types of changes. I talk about with clients 3 types of changes, whether something is developmental, transitional, or transformational. And so after I figure out the type of change that is being introduced, I then think about the types of change models that I'm aware of that support those types of changes. And if I'm not given the opportunity to actually do that diagnostic or ask the questions, then I know that I have one strike against me in terms of trying to bring about the change. And as an independent consultant, I have the opportunity of sort of stepping away from that, because I feel like I am not in a position to be able to offer a client what will be helpful for them. And they may be in a situation where they're running quickly, but without doing the due diligence, they're going to take me down that unsuccessful path. So before I had learned about true change frameworks, I was often invited to lead change efforts. And I remember specifically, this was probably in 2010, there was an implementation of a learning content management system within the organization that I was working in. And because there was so much resistance from one group, the person, the project sponsor, you know, actually didn't want a representative from that group, which I now know was just a terrible disaster, right? Because we were not getting buy-in from the group that was resisting the most, right? Instead of appreciating their resistance. So there are a lot of my experiences that change initiatives that are not successful are ones where we are unaware of, as I described, the type of change that is occurring and then the type of change plan that accompanies that. And sometimes it's more than one type of change, which makes it even more complex. So I will just briefly touch on the model that I talked about, because I've had a graduate student from my class reach out to me after one of the semesters that I taught and said, why didn't you teach me this model when we were in the program? And I said, okay, it is now, every time I'm speaking to a UMBC audience, I am going to share this model. So the name of the model is called the AdCar Model, and the acronym, and I will type it into chat with you, so give me a moment. The AdCar model, and A stands for awareness, the D stands for desire, the K stands for knowledge, the I'm losing track here. The other A stands for ability, and then the R stands for reinforcement. So this is a model that was developed by an organization in Colorado called the Perseki Group, and Jeff Hyatt is the founder of this model. It was initially started with technology implementations, so it is not a change model that, you know, applies to all change efforts. It was most closely aligned with technology implementations. What I like about it, especially as a student of instructional design, you'll notice two of the letters in there, this knowledge and ability. This is oftentimes where the training folks come into play. So if you're working with a change champion who hasn't tried to think about the other pieces, the awareness piece or the desire piece, and they're just jumping in and say, give these people training, they don't know what they're doing, right? This is where you get the resistance. The undesired resistance, not the welcomed resistance, because not all resistance is bad. So if you give people awareness about why a change is happening, what benefit or what the process will be, so somebody has thought out the process, right? What their role is in it and what the organization's role is in it and how they will be supported in this change, right? Then they are not change ready. And a lot of times people will confuse this awareness piece, they'll call it training. I'm currently doing an event like this where I've been brought into an association, and they'll say, Catherine's doing the training, and oftentimes will begin by saying, this is an awareness briefing, because I'm not really training people on how to do anything. I'm getting them ready for the change, right? And I'm communicating these things. And the knowledge, ironically, the knowledge and the ability piece is being done by another training vendor, because they consider that vendor the training vendor, even though I'm an instructional designer, and they consider me the change champion. And so they've brought me in to help them with this awareness piece. And it was because of something that Greg said when we first started, that I ask a lot of questions. And so one of my first questions was, how are you getting the organization change ready? Just like tonight's presentation is on learner readiness, I ask people how you're getting people ready for the change, right? And then I ask them, okay, how are you inviting people to embrace the change, which is the desire piece, and all of the activities that come into getting people comfortable. And I can tell you, I've sat in presentations with individuals that are change experts that talk about creating what they call an adult binky, right? So just like as a child is going through a transition, they might have a pacifier or a blanket or a stuffed animal. With every change effort, if you think about it, when you're letting go of something, there is a loss. And so people are looking for attachment. And so with the awareness and the desire, you're trying to help them to attach to the new vision and where we're going. And if you don't do that piece, that's when you get the resistance and some of the stonewalling and some of the anger, right? So you're trying to get them to attach to something new, this new, better world that we are entering, right? Then the next piece of this, we'll look at the knowledge and ability pieces. This is oftentimes where we're brought in, and we don't even know any of the other pieces before. And if we don't ask those questions and we just jump into building learning objectives, we don't know any of the other pieces. So this is why I oftentimes, even when I'm invited to do the learning piece, I will ask the change readiness questions. And so the knowledge pieces, you know, what information do people need to know? And then what practice are you giving people to be able to practice these new skills? And then the reinforcement pieces, okay, what things are you doing? Just like we do in learning, to reinforce, right, some of the new things that they've learned so they don't revert back to the old behaviors that they had before the change. And you help them to feel comfortable with this change. Now, the dealing with the loss piece, there are entire change models. There's a gentleman by the name of William Bridges, and all of his change applications are related to helping people deal with loss, okay? And some people, if they're not dealing with a technology implementation, but they're dealing with maybe a reorganization, which also has a training component to it, right? But a reorg, people are feeling a loss of a leader. So he will, folks will try to spend an enormous amount of time of dealing with the loss piece, the Bridges model, before they even introduce any of this AdCar information, right? And so it's just being aware of all of that. And these are the two examples that I give to people when I'm getting them change ready and prepared for change. One of them, I don't know if you all are familiar with Tiagi's work. Tiagi has sometimes spoken at our forums. He's a professor at Indiana. And Tiagi will oftentimes tell people, okay, you want to see why it's so difficult for people to change? The example he gives is offering people to think about the days of the week, the way we say them. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right? And then he says, okay, now say them alphabetically, right? And so he says, are you resisting it because you want to resist it, or because you've spent all this time knowing and doing it in a different way? So it's one of those things where even if you do have the awareness about why we now would be saying the days of the week in a different way, and you can be convinced that saying it alphabetically is better than the way that we do it before, you then still need to learn a mechanism for practicing this skill set. And for the people that have been doing it a particular way the longest, those folks are going to need more opportunity to try learning it in this new way. So it's just being really, really mindful of where people are in the change process and trying to give them every opportunity to get over what I call the change curve. So I'll just, I think that all of us have probably experienced more opportunities to talk about failed changes. So I like to focus more on the things that have worked so that those behaviors are reinforced, right? Because it's really hard, but there are proven ways. And so trying to celebrate those and do those are the way that help people to sort of embrace it and move forward. So Rhonda, I hope that answered your first question. And I thank you so much. I see your feedback around the change. So then your next question is, how often do you conduct a process improvement with analysis? Many employers, including my own, feel that they just have training and that's the answer. How valuable do you find conducting analysis for your clients? So sometimes we have a choice in that and sometimes we don't. But the attitude that I always bring to this process when somebody is trying to dissuade me from doing an analysis because there isn't time or there isn't budget. So for instance, I was hired to put together a second level leadership development training for the National Park Service a few years ago. And they had told me, Catherine, we're not paying you to do analysis. We're just paying you to do design and development because we paid somebody else to do the analysis. And by the way, they spent 5 years doing that. So please, please don't spend time and money doing this. We had a commission of 50 people that then got whittled down to 12. And then we hired a vendor to put together this report. So can you please use this report instead of doing the needs analysis from the beginning? And this is what I basically said, of course, fair enough, I can appreciate. So what I do is instead of telling people that I have to do analysis, if somebody else has done analysis, what I'll do is I'll validate their findings, and I'll validate their findings in my design document, right? So I will still ask to validate, many times I will ask to speak to top performers, and I will ask questions of top performers to validate what was either captured by somebody else, or just to be sure that something hasn't changed. Because if they had started their analysis 5 years ago, what they're looking for today could have changed, right? So I don't tell people you need analysis. I basically find a way, using whatever tools I have, to either perform the analysis or to validate the analysis has been done, just so that I know that I'm bringing the right solution, right? Not because I don't, I think the folks that oftentimes are refusing the analysis, they will sometimes feel like they're in an organization that is, we're talking about the resistance word. They're afraid that if you go down the analysis path, you're going to get derailed by the resistors, and that you're never going to get to design and development. So if you're able to show a proclivity towards action, right? I mean, I tell people that analysis is an action. It's a higher order thinking skill, and a lot of people don't like to think. Okay, so I try to, and it saves you time, right? Because if you're building the wrong solution, then you've wasted a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money, right? And oftentimes when I get the resistance to that, I don't meet the resistance with resistance, or I don't try to prove people wrong. One of the best examples that I heard, Rhonda, was my first ISPI program when I was an ISPI president, and there was a long-time ISPI president. He says this is what he does. When somebody comes to them and they believe that training is the solution, even though no design has been done, he allows people to believe that they're right, and he says to them all of the questions, he asks them all of the questions that he would ask during analysis, but just frames it as part of the design. And he also then says questions like, great. So if you know, when we do this training, and then he frames all of the questions that he has, so he doesn't say to them, hold on, let's do analysis, because then it becomes this tug of war. He says, great that you think training is the problem. And the ISPI International president will oftentimes tell you that 1 in 3 opportunities that she receives is learning related. So it's not unheard of, but sometimes there are other things that have to happen. Just like in change, I talked about these change frameworks. There are other things that might need to happen, right? And in the class that I teach, I offer a number of diagnostic processes that help you to very quickly validate if what somebody is bringing to you is a training or a non-training problem. But I learned not to meet resistance with resistance, or try to tell people that they don't know what they're talking about, even if I don't think they know what they're talking about. I just try to meet them where they're at and go with the skills that I have, with the time that they're giving me, to try to validate as much as possible. And so by asking questions, you will get to your analysis. So instead of trying to just assume that training is not the solution or training is the solution, I encourage you to stay in a curious position, because people, if you're asking questions in an empathic way and an emotionally intelligent way, they're going to want to answer your questions. And I have a book in the class that I teach on teaching appreciative inquiry, where you can ask questions that are framed in a more appreciative way, so that even if you're dealing with the most difficult person that's resisting you, when you're asking them these questions, it's a little hard for them to not want to engage. All right, so I do think that we get lots of pushback, right, on the analysis. I hope that offers you some creative ways on how to not sidestep that. I tell people all the time, it's just try to figure out a way to do it within the context of the environment and with the people that you're working in a respectful way, but where you feel that as a professional, you're doing your due diligence in a way that you're doing the right thing by the organization. So of the many services that you provide, which services do you get more requested to provide? So this changes. That's a great question. This has changed. I started the business 5 years ago, and in my first year, the largest I was getting mostly folks that were looking to shorten their training. So they were trying to take things from 5 weeks long to a week, or they were absolutely helping me to make things in a more micro learning format. And I was also really mostly having people were asking me to do design work. And then in the next year, I started to get more development work. And so some of that was follow-on business from the existing client base. There was quite a bit of e-learning that was asked in the second year. And then I started to then get interest. In year 3 and 4, there was a lot of universal design and design thinking that started to surface, making things accessible, both for face-to-face and for virtual environments. A lot of leadership development training. I'm just trying to think of some of our projects from last year. We got a lot of job task analysis and role-based profiling requests last year. We did quite a bit of leadership development training, and then quite a bit of change. We were brought in a lot of time to lead an AdCar change process. One can get certified in AdCar as well, and I had a student suggest that I make people aware of this, because learning is a part of the every change process. So having at least one change model under your belt serves you well. I've done some coaching, but it's interesting. In this last year, it's mostly been around onboarding. So we're starting to see the economy recover. And so in previous years, we didn't have a lot of people asking for learning that was related to onboarding, and a lot of leadership development. So we're seeing a lot of new, new learning to organizations happen. So, and folks that are wanting expertise on learning as it relates to onboarding specifically. And then we're also, because we're seeing a lot of transitions of millennials from more senior people to junior people, we're seeing a lot of leadership development, more leadership development training. At least those are the things that people are asking me. I'm currently on an onboarding project. I'm on a change project. I'm on a leadership development project with onboarding, and I'm getting people asking me about onboarding a lot. And since we've seen unemployment levels at some of the lowest levels than we've seen in a decade, people are really looking for, and they'll even ask me, and I still don't have answers to this, who are the onboarding thought leaders? And I say to them, well, we haven't been building onboarding programs in years, so I don't know who's got the most knowledge in that area, but we're all going to try to figure this out really quickly. So those are the things that people, and something that people ask me specifically, because my undergraduate degree was in economics, I get a lot of interest in financial management training, but I don't think that's industry specific. I think that has to do more with my expertise. But as a general rule of thumb, in terms of what people are looking for, we're seeing a lot of organizational redesign and organizational learning. We're starting to see change, a lot of change that's coming along, and then the onboarding. Onboarding training and leadership training. Those are the things, the sort of trends that I've been seeing. All right, Rhonda, thank you so much for your questions. We will now move over to Rebecca's questions. So Rebecca, where do you see training and development moving? Do you see it going into more of an informal direction? So that is a great question. Rebecca, I don't know if you've learned about, I'm going to type this into the chat, in any of your classes yet, but the 70-20-10, is that something that you've, oh, let me type this in for everybody. Have you seen the 70-20-10 principle in learning? Okay. So this is something that I use a lot when I'm helping people develop their individual development plans in the government. So 70% of learning, we now know, is informal. 20 is social, and only 10% is formal. So even as instructional designers, we are going to be building and helping others build for that 70 and the 20, right? Because we are the most equipped to actually think about learning and creating learning events, whether they're formal or informal. And I tell people, I make my bread and butter from putting together formal stuff, and I'm empowering you to realize that the richest learning opportunities are not going to solely come from this 10%, because the 10% is really expensive. When somebody actually has to spend the time and money to really do the full analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation, that's a serious commitment, right? So that's not going to happen all the time, and we are going to be, and we now have so many other great informal tools that are available, and we are going to be, you'll hear me talking about self-directed learning. We want to empower learners to actually find those other ways to become masters and not solely rely for the learning to happen in the classroom, right? So, and the learning that's going to happen in the classroom is largely mirroring or preparing them for what they're actually going to experience in the job. It's going to be a simulation. It's going to be something that's going to be really applied. It's going to be like a learning laboratory. And so we're going to experience less of what I call the butt in the seat traditional training that we had in the previous century. And we're really going to start to see things, and we're going to be asked, even as instructional designers, to be thinking about how we are going to be supporting. We're going to probably be developing less of the training for ourselves and helping managers to be more effective at creating these informal learning events and these social learning opportunities for people to be able to learn from each other. And there'll be just fewer percentages where we're actually doing this very formal learning. So, and I feel really comfortable. Oh, I like this, the 80-20 rule. All right, so I do have an article on the 70-20 the 70-20-10 that I can share with Greg, and any resources that I bring up. So I'll make sure to share the article with you. And it was one of the things where actually I delivered an effective supervision workshop where I was talking about the 70-20-10 rule to a group of supervisors, and they said, oh my gosh, Catherine, we've been doing this all wrong. Like, we have only been thinking about development as the formal piece, completely missing these other opportunities to help people to develop and grow. So I would just want to talk about a few of the other things that people can be doing in the 70 and the 20, right? And how we as learning specialists can receive more credibility. So one of the things can be, Greg always had shared at the beginning that I'm willing to volunteer my time. We're volunteering for a board is a great way to develop your leadership skills, right? So when you are, you have an opportunity, and these are things I can tell you that one of the woman that recruited me to be the president of ISPI, she worked for the federal government, and she worked into her IDP, her volunteer position through ISPI as part of her leadership development. So that is one. Are e-learning platforms considered informal learning? It depends. It depends on if you're talking about like something like a Facebook, or if you're talking about, so that would be more of a social learning environment. So Rebecca, what type of e-learning platform are you thinking about and trying to decide if it's informal? And as you're typing that in, I'll continue to share some of those things, like job shadowing somebody is another opportunity that you can have, so doing a job rotation. And then I'll add some ideas in terms of the social learning, having like a book club with people in a group, or having like the lunch and learns that are led by people on a team that are able to share their pockets of expertise, right? And so offering frameworks and a structure for teams. So you're not actually designing the learning, but you're giving them a framework that they can use, or a template or a tool that enables them to create either a social learning opportunity for a group, or to create some kind of offering ideas for them about how they can mentorship. There you go, mentorship. So more articulate. No, I would consider that to be more formal, Rebecca. So that's why we're saying that's not going to go away. We're still going to see more of it. It just might shift from traditional face-to-face. I don't consider the e-learning that's authored in Articulate and Storyline is still formal, structured learning, right? It's just happening virtually. So there you go, the YouTube videos, there you go. That stuff is all independent, and that is all informal, and it's all just in time, and it's self-directed. So I, in the presentation tonight, will talk about the benefits of that and how people that spend time actually learning things on YouTube, that might actually be a learner readiness strategy for somebody preparing to take a structured learning event. So great question. Then it says, with the future learner, I have noticed most are excited to learn more and grow within a corporation. Do you see a big difference from past learner to the future learner? Within a corporation. So Rebecca, do you think that they're asking the corporation to create the learning for them, or they are hoping to grow and learn within the corporation? So as you're responding to that, I'm going to just have a look at the second one, the next question. All right. So it's really, so with it, I've noticed most are excited to learn and grow within a corporation. You see a bit difference from the past learner to the future learner. I think when we talk about the self-directed learning, and I hear about this from my friends that are working inside of large corporates, that a lot of times there used to be, in the past, there used to be a lot of very structured development programs where now we're seeing some of that, but a lot of learning is pushed to learners. This is why this learning competency of self-directed learning, since a lot of it is happening informally and socially, is very important. And I think that people are hoping that the corporation will provide it. And if they don't, we'll be helping them to find new ways. So working within the corporation, I found that the younger learners are ready to learn and that the older learners are not as engaged in continuing their education. I have to think about that for a minute. It's interesting. I think that older learners think about learning differently than younger learners. And I think that the older learners think that the younger learners that are listening to YouTube videos, they think that they're goofing off. They don't, sometimes there's not this appreciation of how 21st century learning is. And I think there's this dichotomy. So an older learners may be more comfortable with the structured learning. And so they may, I don't know if this is true, they haven't learned these self-directed learning techniques because they're used to the organization being solely responsible for providing them this formal learning. And so they don't have these skill sets. And I think that's actually also a symptom of why we see pockets of the country, people are waiting for somebody else to give them the learning. And you'll see from the presentation that I'll talk about tonight, the people that are not just most successful are self-directed, but they're also the ones that believe they can do it, right? So if you have this belief that you can learn something, right, and you can find the answer, you are on your path to being a high performer. So, okay, now I'm seeing David's, that's my impression as well. Going to places like YouTube and Moodle can be so valuable, but a lot of people have the impression that you need to always refer to textbooks. So I can tell you, this is what I start off by telling people. When I first started the program, I was really reluctant to take an online class because I didn't know how to do it. And what didn't I have before I started the UMBC program? I didn't have digital literacy skills, right? So one of the things that older learners lack is they lack digital literacy skills. It's not that they lack curiosity, It's that they're missing, and so this will be one of the things that we'll talk about with learner readiness. They're missing some of the 21st century learning skills. And so when they say they don't want to learn, most times they're afraid, because they're afraid they genuinely do not know how to use the tool. We know that adults have a lot of, we need to help them save face. So they don't want to admit that they don't know how to use the tool. So they're afraid, they don't know how to admit, right? And so they're comfortable with just getting the information from a textbook because that's how they learned. And one of the things that with digital literacy, because I myself, when I joined the UMBC program, I saw this happening in the workforce, and I was really afraid that I was going to be left behind the digital divide, and my employer wasn't doing anything for me or investing in me to learn those digital literacy skills. They left it all out on my own. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is sink or swim. And if I don't learn how to learn, right, which is what I feel I've learned from our program more than anything else, right? So once you're able to learn how to learn as an adult, then you can help others to learn how to learn, and just help people feel comfortable with where they are in terms of their digital literacy. And it's a challenge. So it's a challenge in terms of trying to help people get that accessibility. So I do see that as an area, right? And we know this is another thing that when I used to do presentations early on in my studies at UMBC, I would do a presentation, and I often referenced my 70-year-old father at the time, because he used to be so afraid of everything technical, right? And I would say to him, second graders, and this was, 8 years ago, second graders are building PowerPoint presentations now, right? So I would start off with, are you smarter than a second grader, right? And so it was one of those things where we know with the neuroscience that we have the ability to learn anything through our 70s up until our 80s to learn new skills. So this expression that people say, oh, you can't learn old dogs new tricks, we know that's not true. That is more about desire and helping people feel comfortable. Like, it goes back to the change model that I talked about, making them aware of how to use these tools, sharing with them the benefits about how to do it, making it accessible to them, giving the opportunity to practice. The thing with the younger folks is they have some digital acumen. They're not always digital literacy, but they feel more comfortable using those new tools, so they seem more eager to learn. They just have more comfort with using the tools, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have greater interest in learning. All right, the most tech-savvy person in my office a few years ago was an 83-year-old retiree who worked part-time. Amen, Melody. So the person that taught me when I was in the UMBC program, so I share this story with people. When I started the program, I did not even own a cell phone. I was borrowing my father's flip phone, okay? The one that I then started to do presentations about. And I happened to share an office with a woman who was in her mid-50s, who had went and got her master's in multimedia design at Georgia, and who was inspiring me as a 35-year-old, yep, a flip phone, right? She was inspiring me to embrace technology. And through the UMBC program, because that's what I was hoping would happen to me, I tell people, I developed the digital literacy skills, and then I was able to bring other adult learners along in the journey. So when they're afraid and they're resistant, I will tell them, oh, I feel your pain. I know. I didn't even own a flip phone, okay? I did not even own a flip phone. And I remember having to take my first online class at UMBC, how terrified I was. And I will tell people when they're afraid to migrate their training from face-to-face online, that it took me 3 semesters to learn how to be a learner of online learning, right? Because I didn't know how to do it. So just to be comfortable that it will take people some time. And now I teach my classes online. Look at how we are engaging with one another. And I'm helping other people to make that transition. So this actually links very nicely to when you started out in training and development, what was your vision for the organization you worked in? So I was working for an organization when I started in the program that was largely delivering management training courses to the federal government. And as I was learning and becoming more digitally literate, my hope for the organization was that they would also cross this digital divide with me. And in Dr. Williams' training and development class, I wrote a business case for the firm that I was working for to actually start beginning to develop asynchronous learning in the way we're doing it tonight. And the executive director, when he read my business case from one of the assignments that I had created in Greg's class, he said to me, Catherine, you're 5 years ahead of where the market is. But it will take us 5 years to build the capability because we have been doing it this other way for 35 years, right? And so I'm going to fund this proposal and you can start to develop the first webinar. So for my organization, it started off with that. And when I left that organization, I was with them for 7 years. I had evolved to helping them try to think about single source content. I started to realize that our jobs were really going to shift. Before, as an instructional designers, we were becoming content creators, but now there's so much content readily available everywhere, right? I realized it was a matter of trying to create unique experiences for learners. We were not really going to be building content. We might be curating content, but none of us were really going to be total content creators. There was more content available than we knew what to do with. And the question was more about how are we going to redistribute the content to make it accessible to people than trying to come up with original content. And so a lot of what I did was helping the organization get comfortable with thinking about themselves, not just as a content creator, but a way of trying to make the content accessible to their learners in the most engaging and meaningful way. So I'm so happy to hear this story. I work for the department, UMBC, that offers no online courses. My hope is to use my ISD degree to help develop online courses for my department. You can do it, Melody. You can totally do it. And it starts with yourself, and as you start to share your own personal story, then you can help bring people across the digital divide. It isn't easy. I mean, so even though I shared my story with you, I remember when I was in the program and writing the business case, it felt like a fantasy for a while, okay? I even had a few depressing nights because I started to imagine what would I do if they told me I was crazy and that we weren't going to do this, and I'd spent a whole semester thinking about this, right? So I can tell you on the 5th anniversary of the day that I wrote the business case, my department received 5 solicitations to deliver webinars. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, the executive director could see that I was ahead of this and that it could happen. And look at this. It took 5 years, but it still happened. So you totally have got it. And I see that Rhonda's saying, neither does my department, Melody. That's hope for me as well. And so now you have a learning partner and a peer support. So we talk about social learning. So Melody and Rhonda, I hope that each of you will share some of the successes that you have with your departments that will help you to be able to do this. And so Greg is chiming in. The first online course I ever saw was the first course I ever taught online. Wow. Greg, do you want to just share a little bit about that? Because I know that because of that experience you have, this is why our program at UMBC is so unique and different, even from the rest of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, when I was hired for this job like 15 years ago, they said, can you teach online? They had never said, did you teach online? But they basically said, you have to run the program, you have to recruit students, advise students, etc. And oh, by the way, you have to teach 2 or 3 courses a semester too. Can you teach online? And I said, yeah, I think I can do that. And that didn't seem to be an issue with them. So it was a great experience because it taught me everything was new, and it taught me that, you know, if I could survive that from as an instructional experience, I could probably survive anything. Um, I learned very quickly. I also made a lot of mistakes, but I was honest with the students. So I didn't try to tell them that I had a zillion years experience teaching online. And I kind of used common sense, and I use adult learning principles to kind of empathize with them and draw them into the conversation and utilize them as subject matter experts and so forth. And it probably was not the best online course I ever taught, but it was probably better than I thought it was going to be.
And the other thing that that Greg wanted to share, that Greg shared with me, when I started to teach in the program, even though I had designed online learning, I had not delivered it. And so there is a program through Frederick Community College called the COATS program. And I know I was really fortunate to be able to go through this. It's the Certified Online Adjunct teaching program, and it really helped me when Greg asked me to teach the class that I teach in the fall. The class was being taught in a face-to-face way, and the instructor that had been teaching it for a long time didn't want to teach it online. So he said, "Do you want to teach it?" And I said, "Well, I've never done that before, but if you can help me learn how to do that." And he said, "Well, I can send you to this course, then we can do it." And I can tell you, it took me 3 semesters before I felt like the course was really a good course. And then I started to have, the opposite challenge, where I was creating more work for myself because it was so good and the standard was so high. But for me, I can tell you, my first time out of the gate, it was okay. It wasn't great. It was okay. The second time got better. By the third class, I had a student who lost a parent in the semester and refused to withdraw from the class. She just asked for a 3-day extension. And so I thought to myself, okay, this speaks volumes that somebody who is going through an experience like that feels like she's getting so much value, right, from this, that she doesn't want to miss a single minute of it. So there is good online instruction and there's bad online instruction, just like there's good face-to-face training and there's bad face-to-face training. And as we learn more about what good online learning looks like, and we learn from people that develop it well, right, then people will start to feel more comfortable with it as a delivery mode and not feel threatened by it. I was really inspired my first year when I told you I was just trying to develop the digital literacy. I heard Dr. Ruth Clark, who's also spoken to one of our UMBC forums. She was a speaker at an ATD conference, and she had shown a body of research over a 100-year period that shows that we have no evidence that face-to-face instruction is better or worse than online instruction. It all has to do with who's doing the instructing and how well it's been put together. So, all right, let's move on to Melody's question. So Melody says, I see on your website that you have converted face-to-face material for online delivery. What is the biggest challenge in converting a dynamic talk into web content? There are a few things. A lot of what I do, I ease folks that are apprehensive to move online. I start off, the on-ramp for me is sort of the version that we are doing tonight. I feel that virtual synchronous delivery is an on-ramp to online learning, and trying to take the deep dive into creating everything in an asynchronous way is a huge commitment for people that have never done it before. And the huge commitment is twofold. It takes a lot of time and effort to create rich multimedia, to create a very dynamic asynchronous learning environment. And oftentimes folks don't have the budget for the resources that are required. And there are a lot of upfront costs on the front end before you see the residual on the back end. So I find that easing people into the process by maybe doing a blended where you're not going totally asynchronous, right? But that you're doing some synchronous virtual delivery, because people at least feel like they get the human interaction. So the way I structured my class at UMBC and is working really well. Half of the weeks are virtual, the way that we're meeting this way, virtual online delivery, and then the other half are asynchronous, right? Using the principles that we have and using the tool like Blackboard and the threaded discussions and the social learning opportunities that I create for people. So for me, that mixing it up, not making the huge commitment to try to make us some, actually I don't think it's effective to actually do it all asynchronous. People get lost. So for me, the biggest barrier are the resources, the getting the right people. So a few of the resources that are needed when you're trying to develop really high quality asynchronous online learning, you know, you need an instructional designer and a subject matter expert in the content. You need, most times you need a graphics designer to create rich multimedia images. You may or may not need a narrator to create the audio, or you could be doing it yourself, but at least you need to have the skills to be able to create an audio and video recording. So it's a variety of different skills that support online instruction, right? So there has to be some commitment. Now, if you have really good design thinking skills, you can do it on a lower budget. I mean, the course that I created, I believe, is very high quality from a learning perspective with not all of the rich multimedia. And I know that as each year passes, my interest is in adding those elements along the way, right? Rather than trying to front load them on the front end. So the biggest barrier is having a vision for what the course will look like, and what type of model you will use, right? And whether it will be asynchronous or synchronous. And I find that a way to actually start off a department that's trying to do it is to do a hybrid model where they start off actually where they meet half the time in person, and then the other half the time they meet the way that we're meeting. And then once people feel comfortable with not having to drive to campus every week, that way you can then move some content over into an asynchronous and start to move the class instead of trying to redesign the whole thing from scratch without people having the opportunity to talk to each other. So our department is developing some coursework using acrobating, which integrates some online components to engage the students. That's great. That's really great. And just know that you also have a lot of folks that are in our program have a lot of rich resources. So all of the students in your class will be able to, as you start to create, let's say you make one of your deliverables in the program, and shortly we're going to talk about the portfolio. You can, you know, one of your projects for your class in the program is actually designing an online class, right? Even if the university isn't ready for it, you can maybe create the design plan in one semester where you're imagining what this might look like, right? And just like I made the business case to launch the webinar, you might have to do it piecemeal where you're getting that organizational readiness and support from the department to be able to move in that way. And then for another client, for another semester, you work on maybe building a few elements, a few learning assets associated with the online class so that you don't make the full commitment to doing the whole thing right away, but you use opportunities throughout the program to build different aspects of it and get feedback along the way from your classmates in the program. All right, so we'll move on. What led you to start your own business? What was the biggest obstacle to overcome to get the business off the ground? All right, so I knew when I started the program that I was wanting to have my own business. That was one of the reasons that I was attracted to our program. I knew it had an entrepreneurial flavor to it, and I had been looking at MBA programs, and when I was looking at the MBA programs, it struck me that nobody was really going there to start their own business. Actually, they were so afraid to start their own business. They were going there to remove the risk, to learn how to manage businesses, not really to start them, right? So our program was one of the barriers that helped me overcome my fear, because it helped me learn technology, helped me learn a process and get a skill. And by the end of the program, I had a professional portfolio that I could use as past performance references with my clients, right? Whether I was looking for a job or whether I was looking to find consulting and contract work. So getting through the program was huge. But then the barrier, it's funny, the biggest barrier was myself and my believing that I could do this. And so once I got over the fear of, can I do this and can I make this work? And I found mentors. My first year in business, I had 3 mentors, and I still go back to them. But now that I'm in my 5th year, I know that I need to add different mentors that are at a different stage as where I am. So starting up a business is one stage of business development, and then when you're now at a certain milestone, you need a different group of people that are going to advise you to help you now. So for me, I'm trying to figure out how to grow the business. And I oftentimes will help mentor people who want to start. So if you have interest in starting a business, Melody, I'm happy to share with you the knowledge that I got from my mentors in terms of how to start the business. And I have actually helped 3 women in the last year start up their own businesses because I have felt comfortable. But so the biggest barrier for me, so there are 2 things actually that I tell people, 2 things that you need to know. One is having the technical expertise to be able to offer value to a client base. And as you build your portfolio items, you will start to see what types of projects give you interest and what type of organizations you like to work with, right? So then once you have that technical capability, then you know where you can add value and what types of organizations you can add value in. The next part is the money piece, is figuring out, which of those organizations have money for the kinds of projects that I like to do and where I can add value. So one is the technical piece and the other piece is the financial piece. And when people are first getting started, oftentimes it's more comfortable to be a subcontractor. I only serve as a prime contractor. I was very lucky my first year to be able to prime 2 out of the 5 contracts that I won. But a lot of part of the work that I do is subcontracted from larger organizations who consider what I do just a drop in the bucket, and they're so happy to give it to me and my team. And so the biggest chunks of work that I get to do are when I can demonstrate very strong technical expertise to a larger organization that says, great, I just want the confidence that you and your team can do it. We'll take care of making sure to manage the contract. And now I'm getting to a point where I'm growing and it's time for me to start priming. And this is when I say I need my new mentors to help me learn how to manage the contracting piece. So that's the next piece of growth that I have in terms of learning to start to run the business. The next thing that I see here from Melody, your LinkedIn profile mentions that you speak 5 languages. Have you ever delivered training programs in another language for a foreign entity? That's really interesting. So I got started in this profession when I was an undergraduate, actually in college. I had studied abroad and I came back. My family is Greek, but I had studied my junior year abroad, and I started putting, I wanted to keep my language skills current, and so I went to the local church and asked if they had any teaching opportunities, and I was given a 3rd grade class. And because I was given this 3rd grade class to teach, my senior year, when I was applying for positions, I applied for a job to work with the U.S. Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps immediately placed me as an education volunteer, because education volunteers are oftentimes is teaching English as a foreign language, but they have to learn a foreign language. And so because I put curriculums in Greek, they then felt comfortable with my placement as in terms of being placed in Romania. So early on now, it's funny, I am starting to get requests, and I'm starting to see more of this. Like the World Bank has been asking me if I can create instruction in other languages, and not just translation, but localization, right? So this is, I have not had the opportunity since I've started the business, but I'm certainly starting to see requests for it. I did have an opportunity a few years ago to deliver virtual training webinars to a group of consultants that were working in Nigeria on a contract for Deloitte, where they were implementing a USAID program. And initially, the client wanted me to fly to Nigeria. And this was during a time when the 213 women were kidnapped from northern Nigeria. And I was like, I'm not really timid, but I don't know if this is a really good idea for me to be traveling to Nigeria. Can you describe to me what this learning event is going to look like? And the guy says to me, well, Catherine, we'll pick you up from the airport. We'll drive you to the hotel. You'll never leave the hotel. And then you'll go back to the airport and drive home. And I was like, okay, this is silly. This is just begging for virtual learning. But he said, I don't even know what that looks like. Can you put together a prospect for me so that I can share this with the client? Well, I didn't even know it was Deloitte. And I didn't even know that these Deloitte consultants were geographically dispersed throughout Nigeria, and that they were so happy that they themselves were not going to have to travel to the capital city, and that I was hosting this virtual learning program for them. And so every morning I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, because they were 5 or 6 hours ahead, and they wanted it to be midday. And I had this incredibly rich learning experience with a group of consultants that were working in Nigeria. And it was positively one of the most rewarding learning experiences that I've had. The way that they were so hungry for the information. Like, they would get online, everybody would put their cameras up. They wanted to be able to see each other, right? And so they didn't like not being able to see each other, so they wanted to be able to see each other. And then if anybody was having a technology issue, they didn't expect me to be the one that was going to help them. They were all getting on the phone and trying to help each other troubleshoot getting on, which was so, so very nice. I couldn't believe that they were so eager to help each other. They also, some mornings, because it was 5 o'clock in the morning for me, I would hear this beautiful African music that was playing. And then, so they'd show the camera, they would help each other. Then there'd be this beautiful music. And then they'd say, oh, okay, the program's going to start now. And so people would sort of put their cameras down and the music would stop and we would start the program. And I was like, wow, this is not like how my webinars in America go. It was a very different experience. But I do think that this notion of language training being not just translated but localized into other languages is going to be an important part of the skill set as learning gets more dispersed and starts to cross borders. We're going to see more of it, and I wish I could say I had more expertise in doing it, because when the World Bank asks me to do things and they pick like these obscure languages, and even actually not just World Bank, the UN, any of these large multinationals, they are always asking for this. So I think that you're spot on in asking about this. And you've gotten me curious now to go out and find out who does it well, so I'm better prepared the next time somebody asks me to do this. All right, so this next question comes from Karen. 2 things. It seems that adult learners are becoming more self-directed in just-in-time learning situations due to the availability of Google, YouTube, and other tools, and have less tolerance for traditional courses. What do you think? So, Karen, I think this, as I answered the 70-20-10 rule, I definitely think that we want to create learners that are going to be more self-directed, and that we're going to see them, because of the access to these tools, they themselves know that they can find the information, and the learners that have greatest mastery in being self-directed, they're going to go find it. They're not going to wait for us to put it out there for them. And that's why it's really incumbent of us as instructional designers to know that when we're putting together that 10%, it better be something super special that they cannot get anywhere else, right? And we should make it so relevant to their environment that they feel like they absolutely needed this and it was super high value. So then the next thing, the YouTube effect, where learners search YouTube for an answer to questions, click 5 or 6 videos and scrub past the intros and watch for a minute before going to the next one to look for the answers they want, occasionally getting distracted by something else that YouTube may be a risk of self-directed learning. In other words, learning feels faster, but often isn't in the long run, especially when they are looking for only one answer. So the looking for one answer is a problem, and that's a different one than just going out and being self-directed. So that's a separate issue, and that's a separate learning, trying to create, if people are used to multiple choice tests and learning that there's just one answer to an issue, that's a very different learning need to address. I think the self-directed learner actually is not looking for one answer. I think that sometimes when we're creating instruction where people think we're creating evaluation strategies where there is only one answer, right? We're not training people to go out and find that there are more than one answer. There is more than one answer. And the individual that is actually curating the YouTube, they're getting so much information. They're not just, they may be getting some bad information, so it's a matter of teaching people the critical thinking skills to make sure that they're not making any illogical fallacies or assumptions based on poor instruction. So it's a matter of creating those other tools and other skills that help people to make good decisions based on the information that they're finding online. So should be looking towards a world where learning is completely user-driven. I think we're definitely moving into a direction where the people that are going to be top performing are the ones that are going to be looking. They're going to be naturally curious to find the answers. And I have to tell you, on one of my most recent requests for proposals, I actually asked the organization if they had the appetite, instead of my creating a learning solution for them where individuals were participating in team building events, if instead there was interest in my creating events where the participants were leading the team building events and not a facilitator. Because if they were going to have to go out into the fields and lead team building events and build teams, then they should be the ones that are leading the events. Now, I have not yet gotten back an answer from the clients, but I can tell you that from my perspective, I know people use this metaphor, but this is probably not the right one. Like, the more you can give the learners the keys, right? The traditional learning model of there just being one subject matter expert that's giving the information. When I was ISPI president, I know one of my biggest challenges when I was trying to expand membership, I had millennials come to me and say, Catherine, this whole business model is flawed. This old school model of trying to get access to lead to thought leaders by coming to these events, they said, I can access thought leaders on TED Talks, I can access them on YouTube, I can access that knowledge online anytime I want. People used to have to come to universities to be able to access these thought leaders, but they are now available. I can take classes at MIT from the same professors that teach those classes for free, right? So they would say to me, what I'm looking for is my next job here, okay? So am I gonna find somebody that's gonna give me my next job? And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I was like, this is telling me that different people, so the millennial audience is telling me they can find the answers online, right? And meanwhile, I have this older boomer group that doesn't want to go, some don't want to go looking for it because that's not how they've learned to learn, right? So they're still coming, and I have to come up with programming that's going to meet both of those needs, right? And that's when I started to offer a blended approach where, and I added in this networking piece where I'd have the younger folks teaching the older folks some of the digital literacy skills, and then the older people were mentoring folks on how to find their next opportunity. Even if their next opportunity wasn't in the room, they were going to help them find their next opportunity through, oh, by the way, networking, a skill that they didn't learn by taking something online or finding a YouTube video, right? So their learning was just a very different kind of learning. So I think there's a balance. I don't think it will all be user driven. I think we'll still have people that have expertise in areas. Like, I take great pride in the expertise that I have in instructional design. And when people will ask me, oh, do I need an instructional designer? Anybody can put together instruction. I kind of go to the things that Chuck Hodel talks about when he talks about students coming into 602, and the three things that, do you know how to put together learning objectives? Are you familiar with Kirkpatrick's 9 events or any other learning framework that's evidence-based and stood the test of time, right? And do you know how to compile an evaluation strategy to know that learners got out of the learning what you hope they got out of it, right? So I don't think that all learning will be user-generated. I think we just need to feel comfortable with the fact that some of it will be, and some people feel threatened by that. All right. You will probably address this, but what motivates adults to engage when learning? Is it about the end result or efficiency or improved performance? I think it depends on the different, like, motivation is a whole other thing. I think we know that adults like to see progress. So as long as they can see that they're progressing in their learning, I think that I talked about even like how Greg approached me when I was trying to enter the event. They don't want to feel bad about the skills that they don't have. So you're helping people to build on the skills that they already have, and so that they're able to see progress. So giving people feedback. I think the relevance, the fact that they can see that they're doing something that's going to help them directly, if you can link those three things together, adults are going to feel far more motivated. And when I get into the presentation about learner readiness, helping people to appreciate what they know and what they don't know about a topic is a huge motivator. So we'll touch on that a little bit more in the presentation when we talk about the learner readiness. All right, thank you, Karen. So we'll move on to Rebecca's question. What is the most preferred learning method if you had to pinpoint one? It's interesting you asked that. I don't know if this is really a learning method, but a learning framework. That's my most preferred one, is something called the format. And I learned this methodology when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I still continue to use this over 20 years later. And when I was in the master's program, every framework that I learned, I put up against this framework to see if I thought it was better, worse, what it offered to it. It was developed by Dr. Bernice McCarthy in the 70s when she was at the University of Chicago, and she was working with charter schools, and she felt that a traditional learning curriculum framework was a linear one, where if a student came in and they did lesson 1, but then they missed lesson 2. If they came to lesson 3, they were punished for coming to lesson 3 because they hadn't learned lesson 2. And so they realized, why should I come if I'm not getting it, instead of rewarding them for coming as often as they could make it. And so she created this framework, which really rests on the David Kolb learning model, and just made it commercially accessible. And so this framework is a go-to framework that I have used for over 20 years. It rests on 80 years worth of adult learning principles, is very accessible. I've used it when building technology programs, leadership programs, briefings, awareness briefings for my change processes. When I've put together sales presentations, Bernice McCarthy was hired by the Obama administration to organize the inaugural activities using the format method. So I tell people it's a really powerful framework, and I think it's very easy to learn. And she has a book where you can learn it. You can buy it for like $15 on Amazon, where you can become familiar with this framework. But I consider it to be really, really powerful. Okay, what was the most challenging redesign project that you had the opportunity to lead or to participate? Wow, there are a lot. There are a lot, so I'm trying to think of which one brought me the most rich learning activities. I think one of the most challenging redesign projects that I had was working to convert a cybersecurity leadership program, certificate program from in-person to online. And what made this project so challenging was how threatened the professor felt when we started to move the instruction online, because he was unsure about how much he was going to be needed, right, or his expertise. So it was one of those things, you know, this is a guy who went to an Ivy League school, and he had a hard time with making this shift. And so I don't know that I had the skills, actually. I learned this more later, like later in the business. You know, people have egos, and they're not just recognizing it and working with it in a way that, just like adults like to see progress. I don't think I made the same assumption when working with faculty that had been delivering face-to-face the learning associated with the shift to online instruction. And I was struggling myself trying to create the rich multimedia, that trying to navigate this other individual's change resistance and feeling competent and moving in this other area was a whole other skill set. And I, you know, I don't know that by the end of the project, he felt comfortable. This program is still running and winning awards, but you know, it was not fun while we were in it. He would cancel meetings because, you know, he wanted to feel like there was a little bit of power there. So in the future, I think if I could have done that project all over again, I would have done a better job of explaining roles maybe, and what each person is bringing more, and the benefit that it will bring to the SME once it's over. So I would have done AdCar with the SME, but the start at the project kickoff. So did the instructor provide the subject matter expertise? They did. They really struggled when we were moving some of it virtually, like we were recording some of this in this rich multimedia studio, but he was starting to assume that because they had him on video that they would not use him anymore. And that wasn't the case at all. That wasn't what happened, but he was making all kinds of assumptions. And it was largely driven, it was about money and how much money he thought he was gonna not make as a result of his intellectual property being online, which is real. It's very real. So it's a matter of asking those questions about people's comfort with working in this way, the remuneration that they're going to receive, so that they don't feel threatened by the shift. And a lot of times it's what I talked about before. If you don't have those 21st century online delivery skills, then you're going to dig your heels in and not want to move over to delivering virtually because you're afraid that you're not going to learn how to do it. So it's trying to create, this is why I shared the COATS program. Like before you even get to redesign, start off by giving people the skills for delivery so they're not afraid downstream. After you've delivered it online, then they're not going to be the ones hired to deliver it. So Yeah, that was a big, and thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I hadn't really thought about how to reverse engineer that to give people the comfort. So teach people the delivery before you actually go to design so that they feel comfortable with making that available out there. So what was the most, no. Do you notice a difference in the longevity of instructional contact between the public and the private sectors? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. So with the federal government, things in the public space, in essence, the governance is put in place to create stability, right? It's during these times of economic boom and bust. So things are not going to be moving as quickly and as dynamically in terms from a content perspective, because there are a lot of regulations, right? There are a lot of regulations that protect how things are done. So I feel like the shelf life of online instruction, or rather instruction in the public space, is a little longer, whereas the private sector, you're given less time to develop things are moving more quickly because it's mostly profit driven. And so the growth is measured by profit. And so growth in the public center is the ability to deliver on the mission, right? So it's like it's a very different metric. And so the way that you're building instruction and how you're building instruction and the laws that govern it are very different than the private sector. So yes, there is definitely a big difference and a difference in how people like to receive the information, for sure. All right, so it says, Catherine, I'm looking forward to your session this week. The subject matter sounds enriching, and it will generalize to just about any industry. It certainly seems beneficial to help trainees, students with meta learning. What type of evaluations do you use to ensure that learners have gotten better at learning? This is a really, really, really good question. And I have to tell you that it's really changing for me. I can tell you that I'm on a project right now, and my client doesn't have an evaluation, and they don't want to have an evaluation because they don't want somebody to tell them that they have to change what they're doing in the classroom. That's one. So the designers are the same ones delivering it. And they haven't told me this, but then they've also told me, Catherine, I wouldn't mind an evaluation if it wasn't too taxing to administer and if the input that is gotten is high yield in terms of making changes, right? So I get that feedback. There's also now, so we talked about, there's a new world Kirkpatrick model, right? So people are now realizing that if you're only going to be waiting, you cannot wait until level 3 and 4 to assess impact of learning. And we know that Phil Fallimer, he was another presenter at one of the forums, people want to have performance-based feedback, right, at the beginning. They don't want to wait until after a training is done to see if the impact of the learning is effective, right? So Will talks about creating performance-based evaluations during the learning event, right? Not afterwards, to see what mastery is during a learning event. And he even has a book called, I think it's called like Performance-Based Smiley Sheets, where he talks about evaluations, doing real time. So just like learning is real time, well, guess what? Evaluation is real time now too. And I think as we go into the self-directed learning, you'll see that the greatest feedback that a learner can get, and one that's going to give them motivation, is a window for them to see what they know and what they don't know. And if they get what they don't know, what that payout will be for them, then they're going to want to, they don't care how they get the information, they're going to be hungry to get it, right? So I think it's going to be shifting more to performance-based, and it's going to be more real-time, and our clients are going to be asking for that, and they're not going to want to have to wait months to see the return on investment to their learning event. And so it's all going to be, so he wrote a great paper on smile sheets. We need to move on from those. That's right. All right, so let's see what the next one. Do you generally proceed a course that is aimed at something else, such as specific job-related behaviors with one of these courses in general learning theory? No, I don't. I have found a lot of times in the beginning, like as instructional designers and as individuals that like to take theory from, from theory to practice, we get excited about it and I get excited about it, but I find that my clients don't get so excited about it. So I attended a training by a great a training provider called, and I'm going to type this in, the Bob Pike Group. Bob Pike used to say that we used to eat before we serve tea. Serve tea. Now we serve. We used to eat before we serve tea. Now we. So we used to give people the experience, the awareness, and then the theory. That is really what we want to do. Because if we start with the theory, people don't know why they're learning it. So we used to serve people tea before we ate, and now we eat before we serve tea. Because starting off with the theory, if you give people the opportunity to experience something, then you give them awareness about it, and then you share the theory that supports it, then they're more inclined to find the theory to be credible, not the other way around, right? So if you are asking, if you're presenting, and I get excited about the theory, and depending on what audience I'm working with, if I'm with an instructional design audience that I know loves it, then I might break that rule. But in a commercial setting, or even in a, we're the ones that get excited by this jargon because this is our jargon, but they want to have the results. So give them the experience, share some awareness about it, and then just use the theory to undergird it. So that gives credibility to it. All right, what is the length of a session generally like for one of these self-directed learning workshops? Is the time variable depending on how deep these clients want their learners to delve into the theory? So some of the, I'll share with you the length of time. There's no standard length of time, but I'll give you an example which will resonate with this audience, because I know that some of you are going to be working on redesigning a course for academic audiences, but it doesn't just apply to academic audiences. So one of the big changes that I made in my own class is after I started learning more about learner readiness, I started to incorporate all of these elements into my course. And so what did that look like? A week before class started, I held an orientation for my class, right? And I held an orientation about how we were going to be using Blackboard. I kind of did an overview of the syllabus. And then I created an overview of sort of where we were going with the class. And before I got into the learner readiness aspects, where I helped people to understand what they already knew, and then in the first week I asked people to write a reflective piece where I'm inviting them to think about what they already know about the topic. Before I started to do those things, I got some moderate engagement until week 3. Once I started off with this orientation that I established before the class, which shared with people how Blackboard was organized and how the syllabus was dissected and how the assignments would work and how the social learning and synchronous and asynchronous learning sessions would work, I had a gentleman in my class. I have this button in my class where it's like, ask the instructor a question. I got 43 questions in a 2-week period. And I was like, wow. In previous semesters, I had gotten maybe 6 the whole semester. And now I started to wonder that maybe people didn't even know it was there, right? So this is when I talk about some of the learner readiness pieces. And I think that session is only 30 minutes long, right? So I'm not really teaching people learner readiness theory. I'm actually doing those things. I'm trying to get people learner ready, and we'll talk about what some of those things are when we get into the presentation. But I realize now that we're at the hour. I mean, it's 8 o'clock right now, and we've been on 6:30, and I've been spending a lot of time talking about your questions. I wanted to invite everybody to take a 5-minute break to stretch and kind of maybe take a bio break. And what if we came back maybe at 8:15? Does that make sense? Is that good?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. All right, let's do that. All right, well, welcome back. I want to just thank you for coming back, and now we'll join the second part of the program where we step through the learner readiness for future learners. I hope that having the opportunity to have your questions answered has helped prime the pump for this. So by the end of the session, we hope to be able to identify characteristics of self-directed learning, to use self-directed learning competencies, and to plan self-directed learning activities. All right, so in the chat, if you could just type in the answers to, we'll start off with the first question. What have you heard about learner readiness? So think for a minute what you've heard about learner readiness. And as ideas, they don't have to be fully developed. You can type in one word, anything that you've heard around learner readiness. Just feel free to type it in. Nice. The desire to learn is important. I haven't heard much. Prerequisites. Okay, good. Assessment is important. I've not heard anything. All right, great. Wonderful. Okay, so some people have had some have heard some things about learner readiness, some haven't. So for those of you that haven't heard much, only the pre-work scene has been a bit of reading. Okay. For those that have seen a few things, have you built in activities that promote learner readiness in course design, and what kind of activities have you used? So I know some of them have been mentioned, so maybe you can describe what some of the prerequisite work or some of the pre-work that you've seen before a class. We can just share what some activities we've experienced, maybe even as a learner, or ones that we've created ourselves. Only questionnaire to assess technical proficiency, okay? All right, so we see that not a lot of people are building in a lot of things to get people ready for learning. And through the course of this presentation, you'll see what happens for people when you do that. And so one of the premises that Jim had when he started doing this research is that we were so focused on post-training reinforcement that we hadn't really thought about how to front load the learning to build in some motivation, to build in interest and desire, and just general readiness to learn. So I have not just an articulate RISE page to inform people about the upcoming training. Okay, so have you started, here's a sort of related question. It's going to be related to one of the activities we'll do tonight. Have you started designing your professional portfolio? How many of you have started? Yes, great. Yes, great. Wonderful. All right. Yes, great. So then, not professional one, just the ISDU graduate portfolio. Okay, that's still, your grad portfolio is still a professional one. So Melody, that's a good one. All right, so I just want to invite you, as we're going to be thinking about tonight's program, to spend some time thinking about what you would like people to remember, to think, or to feel when they have viewed your professional portfolio. So take a minute to just think about that. And then for those of you that have started it, to sort of reflect on that question a bit. For those of you that are just, getting started with it, this is a nice way to think about the end point. So we're creating our portfolio pieces for other people to view, right? So what is it that you're wanting them to notice? I would like my portfolio to tell a story. I love that, Rhonda. I'm in, let's see here. What is this? Impressed with the workload and engaged in the material. Wow, okay. I would like my portfolio to say innovation. Wow, this is terrific. Competency, okay. Wow, this is really wonderful. Okay, this is great. All right, so this is, as we go into, I like it to reflect everything I've done professionally or in studies, capability and competence. All right, this is great. So we're wanting people to view us as being competent, to be creative, to be innovative, to be, you know, to see, to appreciate all the work that we put into this to develop this competence. So I can tell you I was working with a staffing agency as my business was starting to grow, and I was needing to onboard more instructional designers more quickly. Then I was preparing myself for a surge. And he had said to me, I asked him if he was requiring people to share professional portfolios with him. And he had said, no. And I'm like, well, what are you asking people to show you? And he said, the resume. And I said, well, can I ask you to look at the portfolios? And he said, oh my gosh, Catherine, this is just so powerful. And he says, and this group of professionals, he said, they are truly professional. He said, because they know this, the talent management piece. So I just wanted to start off as we talk about learner readiness. A lot of the evaluation strategy for our program now is this portfolio piece. And so starting with the end in mind, I thought we would use that as something we're going to be thinking about as we think about learner readiness tonight. Oh, great. I want it to reflect a broad range of abilities. All right, so let's have a look at a little bit about what learner readiness is. So learner readiness is the extent to which an individual is prepared to enter and participate in training and in learning, right? So before the training, I had a good understanding of how the training would fit my job-related development. So what is learner agility? So learning agility is a capability to learn quickly. And somebody had said, is this happening more? And people who, with learning agility, are able to transfer skills into terms of knowledge and study skill from one situation to another. Some people call this training transference, the learning agility. Some people will call this learning anchoring. I know that oftentimes I've been told when I create exercises that I'm making the assumption that learners are agile and that I shouldn't. That just because I am, that learners are not agile and they're not always able to transfer something from one environment to another. But those that have that skill are the ones that are more self-directed. And we're trying to help people to be able to do that. So what is learning transfer? Learning transfer is the ability or a degree to which a person can transfer what they've learned to the work they perform. Training activities and exercises the trainers used help me to know how to apply my learning on the job. So what do you do to prepare to learn? So one of the things that we're going to be talking about a lot today is self-directed learning. So it's a person takes responsibility for learning. So they're not expecting the expert to have the learning. They're responsible for it. A person can be helped by others. We talk a little bit about the social learning piece, right? And that learning doesn't happen always alone, right? So so not only can you be helped, but you can be working with somebody. All right, and so what are some learning influences? So we know that environment is important, one's native intelligence, motivation has come up a little bit and how to foster that, some of the experiences that we have, and our own ability. So it's sort of knowing these things when we enter learning situations so that we can prepare ourselves to achieve more. All right, so let's talk a little bit about skills and competencies. So skills are learned activities, and we look at competencies a little more broadly. So we're looking at skills and knowledge and behaviors. So what are some of the self-directed learning characteristic behaviors? So these are the ones that Jim came up with when he went through his original research as he was going through the program. So he's like, what makes an individual self-directed? So it's somebody who's curious, somebody who asks and formulates questions. And I know that Greg had talked about me asking a lot of questions. I know when Jim and I traveled to a conference, one of the women that wanted to join our team said to him, I want to be on your team because you're not afraid to ask provocative propositions that make people think. That you're able to see yourself objectively. Here's a typo, sorry. Okay, then So that's one of those things where knowing your strengths and knowing your developmental areas without criticizing, that is a really, so you see it as a developmental opportunity, that you're able to self-diagnose your learning needs, that you're able to identify the learning resources that you need in order to learn what you need to learn, that you're able to recognize answers to questions. I know this came up in your questions where somebody's looking for just one answer, but the ability to recognize many answers to questions, not just one. Knowing how to research. Not everybody knows how to find information, right? So if you don't have those skills, it makes it very difficult to go out and find what you don't know. Knowing how to collect data efficiently, knowing how to review the data, the ability then to plan your learning. We know on Bloom's taxonomy that planning is one of the higher order thinking skills. So in order to be self-directed, to be able to do these things, it takes some effort, and it's not just incumbent on the facilitator or the teacher to be planning my learning. Knowing how to implement your learning. So again, it's not just the instructor or the teacher that's going to help me to implement the learning, and then verifying what you've learned, whether it's through another assessment or a reflective activity. So you've identified the things that you need to learn, and then after you think you've learned them, how do you know? How do you know that you've learned them? So these are some of the characteristic behaviors of self-directed learning. So let's look at this example. You know, how does self-directed learning apply? How does it show up in my work? So I said we would talk a little bit about the professional portfolio. So let's take a minute to talk about some of the ways that you might use this professional portfolio or this graduate portfolio in your life. So in the chat, some of you may have already started using it. Some of you may just be starting to put it together, but let's talk a little bit about why we do this in our profession. How might you use this? A visual resume, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. A way to show the organization what can be done in training. There you go. So to demonstrate capability and maybe even vision for something. Proof of possessing competencies, right? So instead of telling somebody that you can do something, you're able to show, to demonstrate that you're able to do it. That rather than describing things I've created, I can just immediately show outputs. There you go. Great. All right. So as we're putting, people sometimes hire ISDs based on common vision. There you go. So it's about sharing a common vision. So showing alignment. What they like about your work, right? They can see what they like about your work. Creativity, they can see how your creativity is expressed. For fit, great. So we're going to take a look at, as we're putting our professional portfolio, some of the things that we might need to do in order to prepare for it. So as you're putting your portfolio, there are things that you know, then the things that you want to master, and then sort of the area in the middle are the things that you're going to need to fill in. Oopsie. Okay, so let's start off by how we think about what is current or known. So as you begin, as you have started to begin working on your professional portfolio, begin by exploring what you know about a professional portfolio. So what do you know about it? In what ways would you like to enhance your portfolio? You might think about identify the actions needed to complete your professional portfolio. Take the action to complete your portfolio. Identify evidence that your portfolio is complete. How will you know it's can demonstrate the things that you said you hope people will remember or think about? How will you know that? Then, of course, celebrating the success. So if we go to the middle column, we might look at, based on your personal curiosities, what questions do you have about professional portfolios? So how many of you, as you started to build your own professional portfolio, went out to look and see what other portfolios look like? And if you're able to find any. I would like to be flexible and readily available, right? I actually never saw a portfolio before. How many samples are typically in a portfolio? See, that's a good question. Not portfolios, but I like to look a lot online on training and learning. Okay. So I've not found one, right? I've looked at a few examples, then embellished a bit. So that's one way to be looking at it. Sometimes, so we're a little ahead of the curve. Our program is very innovative in creating the portfolios. So I think that's why we don't see a lot of them. I've seen some from other former UMB students and professional ones, right? So that's one way to be able to look at it and to get questions answers. So then it says, what changes will complete your portfolio? So after you've put it together, what might you change? Are you using a particular competency model, right? Either through ATD or ISPI or another professional association? And are you focusing on specific elements of the competency? And do you feel like you've demonstrated it sufficiently? Have you identified resources and strategies you will implement to complete your portfolio? In some instances, what tool will you use? And the pieces that you're creating, will they live nicely within this tool? And, does it allow you to describe it and somebody so that they can get answers or they can have the story? Somebody said the story that you want told. Do you get feedback from others after you've created it to see if, the story that's being told is the story that you were hoping people would receive? Then how you might change it. Then identify the target date for completion. So we know that, it's a requirement for graduation, right? So at least that is a known entity, depending on when that will be for you. And you have the opportunity to work on it throughout the semester, throughout the duration of the program. So it's not an unexpected surprise. But, thinking through these things instead of waiting until the last semester may put you in a position, right, to have a stronger portfolio at graduation. So if we put all these pieces together, the questions in red and the questions in orange, so the things that I know and then the things that I need to know, then we come up with a complete list of competencies that all link to those 12 things that were listed before in terms of self-directed. So if you can begin to look at all of these questions in the yellow column, then it will begin to position you to be more self-directed as you begin to put together your professional portfolio. So here's a question. Do most people create websites to house their portfolio items? So actually, I'll ask Greg, because I haven't seen those. Greg, I don't know if you're still with us, and you've had an opportunity to see more student portfolios. Are students building websites, or are they using another vehicle to present their professional portfolio?
From the hiring managers that I talk to, they'll say that the work sample is more important than the wrapper of the website. Although some people feel really like bound and determined to create a website. I think a lot of people are just sharing theirs through like Box and Dropbox and Google Drive and that sort of thing. Of course, there are website development programs where it's like, Wix and Weebly and things like that. But what I always tell people is just be careful how much time you're spending on the website versus your work sample. And what I found is some people spend way too much time on making the website that perfect color or look, and they're kind of neglecting their work samples a bit.
Okay. I know when I put mine together, and this was 8 years ago, I had used a wiki site. And what I liked about having the wiki site is when somebody would ask me in an interview to describe something, I would say to them, "Oh, this is in my professional portfolio. I'll invite you to it." And I liked having a wiki because I could see when they went in to look at it, and I could see what they were looking at, so that when I had a follow-up interview with them, I could talk about the pieces that were of interest to them. So somebody wrote, "I started a Wix site." That's great. I just sent work samples in a zip folder and then recently used Adobe Spark to create a web-based one. It made it so very easy, and the end result looked good with little effort. Terrific. Adobe Spark. David, can you tell us a little bit about Adobe Spark?
Sure. It's included in the Adobe Creative Cloud, which as students we can actually get a pretty cheap like monthly subscription to. It's like only like 15 or 20 bucks, and it kind of gives you like all of Adobe's programs, you know, the more difficult ones to use like Photoshop, and then a lot of the, you know, ones that are easier to master, like the Adobe Spark. It's incredibly like template based. It kind of gives you like a you know, generic but like, you know, good looking modern portfolio, and then you can just kind of like sub in, you know, like various images using their content like library, and you know, your work samples naturally, and yeah, it was very easy to use, and I'm very much a like web design layman.
Great. So I see Rana said portfolio sites I found. That's great. And then David, there was a question, do you have to pay for server space?
I don't believe so. I haven't really used it enough where like space has become an issue. I know that with a lot of it, you are saving it to their cloud, but I will like double check on that and see if it like has space limitations.
Great. All right. Thank you. So Rhonda, I'm going to just go try to click on this link that you typed so we can see. Wow, look at this. This is nice. 23 model examples of an instructional design portfolio. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, so I'll put this down. So you see how these, just going through these competencies of learner readiness, how they can help you in trying to think through things and see the things that you know and the things that you don't know, so that when you begin to put together your portfolio, you become aware of how to enhance it, what success looks like, how I know all I've gotten there, and then this feedback of, well, the people that are going to be receiving it, how do they like to receive it? All right, so when is self-directed learning applied? So actually it happens before, during, and after learning events, and it happens both in formal and in informal learning. Oops. So I had asked at the beginning, what are some pre-learning activities? Here are a few, and some of you mentioned some of these. So some people may get custom notes sent before training. So maybe a course, somebody might get cliff notes on something or try to read up on something, or they'll do a wiki search on a topic. Somebody talked about product software. Somebody may listen to webinars or go to lynda.com to learn about a topic, maybe before a topic is going to be presented formally. So we talked about how some informal learning activities can help to be used for formal learning activities. Just like, you know, folks were saying, well, people are going to YouTube. All right, if they're going and they're looking for one answer, maybe the formal learning activity that accompanies that is something that gives them a myriad of answers, right, that they didn't find on YouTube, right? But they're at least learner ready then when they have the formal learning activity. It might be a WBT, so somebody asked that. So there might be some self-directed learning that comes. It might be an assessment for people before the formal learning activity. People may be asked to read books. In undergraduate, a lot of professors will ask you to do some summer reading, right? Or read articles. You might ask students to read articles before or watch a video on a topic before. I know that I get some pushback from my federal clients, and then others are starting to create libraries of their own that support some of the structured learning, and they're asking me to curate books, articles, and videos for them. Of course, somebody had said a survey or assessment questions. Some people will ask the same questions on the front end as on the back end. I like to do a reflective question where I ask people to think about a topic, and then I ask them to think back after the formal learning event to see what they thought they knew and then what they've learned, right, to reinforce what they've learned. And orientation activities, as I had described some of those things. And it's just a little thing. Some of these things are just little things. And these are things that actually begin to get people ready for learning. Okay, so during the learning activities, what are some of the things that instructors can be doing to promote self-directed learning? So they can ask questions. So you can ask questions of yourself or the instructor, so you can encourage in the way that Greg encouraged you all to ask questions today. And we spent quite a bit of time trying to get those questions answered, and then even some follow-up questions that have come. Ask for real-world examples. Everybody in the class did this. You can get and receive feedback. We talked about the portfolios. We looked at it and you got some feedback a little bit around what you knew and what you didn't know, and maybe then showing your portfolio to classmates before submitting it for final assessment at the end, or before submitting it to an employer. As an individual, if possible, get support from an instructor or coach. Practice new ideas, concepts, and methods. Recognize when the answer is found, right? So when you find the answer, just a recognition of that. And then recognizing when and verify when learning applies to your work. So trying to create that relevance for people to enhance that learning transfer. So it's not just an activity. As instructional designers, we can get excited about an activity, and sometimes we don't have context about the work environment, right? And so then it's just useful for us, but not really for the participant in the training event. Okay, so then after learning, some of the things that promote self-directed learning is the opportunity to practice and apply these new ideas and concepts. So at the end of tonight's presentation, I hope that you will take some of these ideas that were shared around the portfolio, and that they help you to continue to be self-directed as you begin to curate your pieces and prepare them to share them with the world. That you'll review and ask yourself questions, then review notes or research the topic to determine the answer. I journal a lot when I have questions, and sometimes I'll even get up in the middle of the night if something's in my subconscious mind, and I'll jot it down. As an individual, if possible, get support from an instructor or a coach. Reflection activities, and recognize and verify you are successful. So Greg will attest to this. When I was in the program, I would always ask for the class syllabus before I would register for a class, because I was actually doing an assessment of how learner ready I was before I even had the language for what that was. So I was trying to see what I already knew, what new things I was going to be learning about the topic, what the timeline was for things that we were going to be doing, if I was going to have the time to be able to learn the things that I didn't know or thought I needed to learn during the time. And I can tell you, I definitely did not do those things as an undergrad. So there was something about our program that pushed me in that direction to help me actually become more learner ready. I can say I probably am not as disciplined as I was when I was in the program in doing so. And in preparing for this presentation, I think it's been a really nice reminder to me to continue to practice these skills that I honed when I was in the program. All right, so in summary, we looked at these 12 competencies. We talked about learner readiness promoting these self-directed learning competencies. We talked about how learning transfers the ability or degree to which a person can transfer what they've learned to the work they perform. And in this situation, we talked about our professional portfolio as the work that we're performing in the program. Whoopsie. So, and so here are some of the overall benefits. You get overall improved performance. They'll be better prepared for learning. They're better able to develop that learner agility where you can transfer learning from one environment and one discipline to another. Somebody had asked about motivation. If you are teaching people to do this, they become more self-motivated, and they're more thorough in the learning experience. And let's look at a graph. So in a traditional timeline, right, we'll look at, you know, there's mostly administrative. Let's say there's no learner readiness. You see there's formal learning here. And then post-learning, you know, there could be some informal learning and they're trying to get to better comprehension. When we add formal learner readiness, this pre-learning activity, right, what happens is you see this bump up in this better comprehension. They hold on to it longer, right? So it goes up higher. And so people hold on to the knowledge for, there's better comprehension, and they hold on to it longer. So this assumption that we used to have about all these post-learning reinforcement tools, those are also important, right? But what we now know is front-loading some of the activities to help people be self-directed and also to prepare them for learning enables them to actually have to gain more out of the formal learning session, and then also to retain it and have better comprehension after the learning event. So spending and investing a little bit of time trying to include those activities on the front end, create that upward tail and benefit for learners. All right, so I know we're ending near the end of the time. I'd like to actually wrap up with these two questions in the chat. So given what you've observed in tonight's session about learner readiness, what is one thing that you'll begin doing as a learner in the graduate program to prepare yourself to learn? And what is one thing that you will do when designing formal and or informal learning events to prepare participants to learn or others to learn? So just take a minute thinking about what we've talked about with learner readiness, and as you're working your way through the graduate program, what you might do to be more self-directed and learner ready, and then what you'll do in the sessions that you're creating. When you're ready, just post those in the chat. All right, so as people are typing in, there was a question that I'll respond to. So yeah, all of the instructors were agreeable. I think there was just one who was updating their syllabus at the very last minute and even refining it during the semester, and I would make adjustments too. And so if somebody was reticent to say, I understand that it could be subject to change, can you just let me know where we are today or where you are today? And I got syllabi from everybody. All right, so Rhonda says, one thing I'd like to help with learner readiness is conduct an introduction to our department with an informal Q&A session. That's great. I love the syllabus idea. I did this for my undergrad with very mixed results, reaching out to learners in advance and using more than a pre-assessment of abilities to guide their learning is a fantastic idea I plan to implement. I have been meaning to join and get involved in ATD to learn more outside of the program so I'm better prepared to apply diverse knowledge. Great. Karen, so in my class, I actually ask students to actually get involved with either ATD or ISPI. I don't require a textbook, but I think it's important as this informal learning, even when they're formally learning, to develop that network. So to apply the 70-20-10 model, great, Greg. When designing learning events, I can create activities to engage the learner, such as icebreakers and quizzes on topics that will allow to gauge what the learner readiness is for the class. Terrific. This is really great. All right. So we'll just give another little bit more time here to see if somebody else. I agree with Dr. Williams about the 70-20-10. Use an informal environment would be great to reinforce learning. Great, Melody. Send an introduction email with a short, energetic message about the content. Great. I think it'll be important to understand what is required for the portfolio. I think getting feedback from mentors and colleagues about some of the coursework will be helpful to prepare. Great, Rebecca. To prepare myself to learn about the program, reaching out for a mentor. Good. Wonderful. All right, so folks may still be typing in and thinking about some of these as you're doing it. Others that have finished, if there are any final questions or comments or insights that you'd like to post in the chat as we wrap up the program this evening, feel free to do that right now as well. Rebecca, the ISD website has very detailed schematic on the portfolio. Look under the current students. Great. Thank you, Melody. All right, so here are a few resources that were used around the learner readiness competencies if you want to take a deeper dive. I am also providing my contact information here. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I want to say thank you for your analogies. It was great contextual advice. Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. I appreciate your questions. I hope that they were useful and meaningful. I just want to wish everybody success in the program. As Greg had shared at the beginning of the program, it's really easy for me to speak so highly of the program. It was truly transformative. So you want to talk about change. It was really transformative. It enabled me to begin the business, which I tell people for me is like living the dream. So please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to others in the community that's built. We have a great community here at UMBC. And I just, I want to thank you all. And I wish you continued success in the rest of the summer semester. Greg, thank you so much for having me tonight.
Catherine, thank you so much. It was tremendous. I always learn every session, and tonight was certainly no exception. I think I can speak for the students saying I thought this was terrific. I got a bunch of ideas that I'm mulling over in my head right now. So thank you so much. I will make the recording available to you, Catherine, as well, if you would like that.
That'd be great, Greg.
Okay. Anyone? Any last questions for Catherine before we kind of sign off tonight? This went very quickly. I can't believe it's been like over 2 hours and 20 minutes or so. Went very fast. All right, Catherine, thank you so much.
Great.
Appreciate
All right,
your
everyone.
time.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the week and a great summer.